Hey, everybody. Welcome to the First Name Basis podcast. My name is Sheetal Jaitley. I'm your host, the CEO of Tribal Scale. First Name Basis is where we bring industry leaders and innovators to come and have a real conversation, an authentic conversation about the matters of today and what they're doing in their innovative roadmaps. Today with me, I got a special guest, someone I became friends with just about a year and a half ago, and Alfredo Tan, who's the Chief Digital Officer of WestJet. So Alfredo, welcome to the show.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me, Sheetal. Unless you remember, we met each other at a great restaurant that we should go visit once this is done.
Absolutely. Let's get into that right now. I actually ended up meeting Alfredo. Was it through a connection? We started chatting somehow. I know that much.
Yeah.
And we planned dinner, and Akira Back just opened up. And we were like, hey, let's go check it out. And we went to Akira Back. So can't wait for it to reopen again. We're going to have to go there again.
For sure. Nothing like food to bring friends together.
And and that's what really ended up happening. I think we didn't even talk much business there, but we sat down and ended up knowing so many people in common, and really kicked off a friendship. So it was nothing like breaking bread with someone.
Totally.
So yeah, good plug to Akira Back. I'm missing the food there a lot. Alfredo, I wanted our viewers to get to know you a little bit better before we jump into all the things that are happening in the airline industry and in the travel industry today. But you got a very impressive background, and even before we just went live right now, you were just talking about that you're still doing some amazing things and always making yourself better by learning. But if you could walk us through a little bit about your background, like how did you get to become the Chief Digital Officer of WestJet? It's an incredible story we talked about at dinner, and so let's have that conversation now.
Yeah, I mean, I won't spend too much time going into the details, but I guess at a high level, I started off my academic career sort of focused mainly in the life sciences. So I have a degree in forensic science and biology, but that was happening around the same time as the boom that was happening in tech. So I became increasingly fascinated in tech, missed Web 1.0 completely, but I told myself that when the next version of this comes out, whatever that looks like, I wanted to be a part of that. So I started spending more time learning the technical subjects, and got a job at Bell Nexia. Shortly after that, I ended up at Simpatico MSN. And then one day got the magical call from Silicon Valley, and it was a recruiter representing Yahoo in Sunnyvale. So I had a great opportunity to work for Yahoo during some of its glory days, and another complete set of accidental things happened, and I ended up at Facebook around 2009, but started getting the calls from them around 2008. I thought I had a pretty terrific run at that, and decided.
That's awesome. So Facebook at that time, like in 2008, and correct me if I'm wrong with my memory, it just kind of started opening up beyond college campuses, right?
Yeah, it was just early days. So the company was founded in 2004, and most people were betting that Facebook would become the next MySpace or Friendster.
High five, all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or high five. No one was thinking it was going to be the tech giant that it is today. And for the most part, everyone thought it was a fad. There was no real monetization strategy that was clear to the public or how it was really differentiated from the other services. So joining in that time period wasn't as obvious as it is today. Today, if Facebook or Google or any of these tech giants want to call you to go work there, it's pretty obvious that that's a great place to work. But back then, it wasn't so easy to make that decision.
So you took a shot. I mean, Yahoo being a large company, kind of established, well, not kind of, totally established back then, to go jump on and join Facebook.
Yeah, I think the best roles, and maybe you'll agree with this, Sheetal, based on the clients you work with, the best roles are the ones without the guaranteed outcome, right? To a certain extent, if you know what the outcome is going to be, how exciting could it possibly be? So why not pursue things? And that was even the same with Yahoo at the time. Yahoo still had a bunch of its future to be determined, and obviously we know how that played out. But back then, there was still a lot of work to be done. So the way I think about every career decision is, which one gives me the most opportunity for growth, where the greatest learning is possible? And usually the underpinning of that is the unknown of what's going to take place.
Yeah.
Right? And that's usually pretty exciting to do.
You get uncomfortable when you go into the unknown. That's when you actually start learning things. I say that to everybody right now, especially in this time of the pandemic. I tell my team, I say, hey, you know what? There's a lot of opportunity in chaos, and you're going to learn more in this downturn than you'll ever learn and 5 years of upswing, right? You learn in these troubled times because there's so much unknown. You're going to start figuring things out, and you're going to be stronger for when times are good.
Absolutely. And to a certain extent, if you think about your career in shorter life cycles, like maybe 18 months as opposed to 18 years, then you're forced into this mindset. What can I build in that time period? What, to your point, what can I learn in this time period versus thinking about it as a painful moment and letting the crisis go to waste. So if you think about your career in those shorter segments, you have this desire for an increased velocity to accomplish things.
Cool. So what did you join Facebook as? Like, what was the
Um,
title? Or what was the job description? Because nobody really gives a shit about a title, but like, what was the job description?
well, the interview process was quite extensive, mainly because Sheetal, it wasn't clear on what the job was going to be. Right. So if you think about it,
When
right?
you talk about unknown, you were going into a black hole.
Yeah, and the message from all the people that were there already, plus the people that were doing the recruiting, was just come along for the ride. There was so much work to be done from a marketing message perspective, a growth perspective, a sales perspective, an education perspective. We'll figure all of that out together, right? So to a certain extent, the draw was maybe how unclear the role was going to be, because at that point it was also unclear what the future of the company would be as well. So in the early days, much of the work was around the education of the platform to the biggest businesses and agencies that mattered, right? So that was a huge amount of the effort. So how do we drive value for our advertisers or marketers on the platform? Eventually, I got a chance to spend some time in the emerging markets. So I was one of the first I was the first country manager for the Philippines to help launch Facebook in the Philippines, and then helped out in Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, and then made my way around through Latin America as well. So
Awesome.
the role has changed dramatically over the time, and the company has changed in that sort of 8 years that I was there. But the exciting part was almost on an annual basis, you could see the company transform itself. So the roles that you would be in would automatically transform themselves. Even if you didn't pursue a new role, the role was just ever changing.
Absolutely. So that brings another good, like, I think, lesson learned here, is when you're in an organization, it's never just say, hey, that's not my job. Like, the smart thing to do is be like, hey, I'm going to embrace the change and what's happening, and I'm going to start figuring things out and see where I can be a value add, even though my job description may have completely changed.
Yeah, it's probably similar to the people that you hire in your organization. You want people that are somewhat like learning organisms, right? So they're not boxed into what they're doing today. They're always constantly finding new ways to get better or learn something different. And these hyper growth companies force that out of you, right? To a certain extent, if you're joining like any growth company that is moving from startup to mid-sized, then eventually becomes a Fortune 500 company, for that to happen in a short period of time, if you're not a learning organism, you're not going to last very long in that construct. And to a certain extent, if you think about this pandemic, it's also forcing people to do the same thing, right? Because the world has changed. I mean, listen, 8 weeks ago, the world was very different, right? So if you have no ability to adapt to the change, that's where the challenges become on, sort of propelling your career forward.
Amazing, amazing. So you're at Facebook, you're learning a lot, you're traveling the world, you're experiencing. I could only imagine what your diet was and all the awesome food you got to eat. When you were in the Philippines, did you eat balut?
No, I mean, I don't eat that now, so I didn't eat that when I was there. But to your point, the food was incredible in Southeast Asia. That was probably the hardest place to stay healthy, and
Yeah.
there's just something about that region that is just unique from both the technology advancements that are taking place, the sort of societal advancements that are taking place as people move from sort of poverty to middle class and then access to all
Mhm.
this great technology. But the food, my friend, was just it's just
I can
unreal.
imagine.
Even the street food is to die for.
Awesome, awesome. So you were doing the Facebook thing, and then how did you end up at WestJet?
Yeah, I wanted to come home. So one of the things I tell
And
people
home was
who
always
kind
here
of
in Toronto.
home was here in Toronto. I mean, I was born in the Philippines, so it was a bit of a fairy
Mhm.
tale story to to leave my homeland of the Philippines and then one day
Mhm.
get to help launch one of the most important technology companies in my home country. But eventually, after spending so much time internationally, what I really wanted to was just come home. I know everyone says this, but I really do think this is the greatest country in the
Mhm.
world, and only spending time away, which, by the way, those are exotic, amazing locations to visit, and I have no issue wanting to go back. But this place, this city, and this country were just always home, and I just wanted to come back home. And when I was coming back home, it just felt like the right time to take a bit of a break. I
Mhm.
hit my 8-year anniversary, and 8 years is an eternity, as you know, in Valley
Yeah.
companies. So it was just time for me to take a bit of a break. So I took a bit of a break, wanted to take a longer break, but an incredible recruiter at WestJet by the name of Kara Watson ended up giving me a call. We had a great conversation. One conversation led to another. I asked a series of tough questions around what the role would look like. You know, sort of, it was
Mhm.
also relatively undefined. I mean, there was this sort of North Star of what the role was to become.
Because this role that you're in never really existed in before at WestJet, right?
It was scattered in pieces. And
Mhm.
as you're aware, most companies still, I mean, we'll talk about it later, but like how COVID has accelerated this, but most companies that are not purely technology companies that you're used to working with, digital isn't often at the forefront of strategy or a delivery mechanism or enabler. So it was a role that was already there, but it was sort of divided across a bunch of different areas with no clear focus at that point, meaning people were working on it, but it wasn't being considered strategic to the organization.
Mhm. Okay. So you get into this new role, a lot of uncharted water. Beautiful background, by the way. I can't
Thanks,
wait to
thanks.
dip my toes in that water over there. But there you are in uncharted water, and the mandate for you is to do what at WestJet?
So the focus is, so at a high level, every company, as you know, is trying to become more and more of a digital enterprise. So that isn't anything new, but the way we narrow that down is how do you improve the guest experience? Because we know that, and you know, again, we'll talk about this later as it pertains to COVID and the pandemic, but even back then, 2 years ago, the consumer experience is getting redefined by digital channels. So how do you think about the consumer journey, the guest journey, more and more from a digital lens so that the guest experience is a combination of the physical and the digital world? And then as a result of that, can you improve commercial performance, right?
Right.
Can you improve the metrics that matter, whether that's cost savings, driving revenue, increasing load factor, decreasing friction for bookings? So all of those things are important, but the top layer is how do we first make the guest experience better where we can using our digital tools? But before you do all of, so anyways, that was super intriguing to me, Sheetal,
Mhm.
to work on an industry that, as you know, is important to the lifeline of most countries in terms of its impact on GDP and employment and
Of
leisure
course.
travel and business travel, but also it's largely still unchanged from a technology perspective, right? If you think about how many industries have been transformed because of digital, the aviation industry still has a lot of catching up to do compared to other industries.
I'll tell you, I missed getting to South by Southwest because I flew from Toronto to Chicago. Chicago to Austin is what I was supposed to do because a dot matrix printer at Pearson was not working, and they were not allowed to fly without a manifest printed, and made me miss my connection to Austin. And if you have ever been to South by Southwest trying to get to Austin during that time and you miss a flight, regardless, I ended up in Houston and had to rent a car. But I couldn't believe my mind that I'm going to this amazing tech conference and a dot matrix printer was my downfall.
Right. So to your point, think about that's one example. There's probably 70 to 100 examples throughout the guest journey where the technology or the digital experience can be greatly
Mhm.
enhanced. And that was the sort of, to my earlier comment, that's where the risk plus reward is, right? So there's so many areas that you can make better. It's challenging because it is an older industry that hasn't come from the digital era, but has to transition to that. So that's what was exciting about the role. And then number two, probably sort of the third point is, what's the cultural changes you need to make to create a different operating model in terms of how your people work to start
Mhm.
deliver more like a tech company than the way it used to?
Of course, of course. And that's, when we look at our transformation practice, we always talk about people, process, and then tools, right? And those are like the three main pillars that you're going to start focusing on. But the people and the culture change is often the toughest one.
It's the
Um,
hardest.
it's the hardest. It's the hardest. So you go into this, you go into WestJet, and what were some of the first things you started doing to help transform them to start thinking like a software company or even have some of that Silicon Valley mindset?
Yeah, so obviously spent a lot of time asking questions because despite your post about me being a travel expert, I'm actually wouldn't consider myself a travel expert. I love the action of traveling as a obviously as a business
Mhm.
person. and as someone who enjoys it. But in terms of industry experience, I had very little. So I spent a lot of time really asking a lot of questions and trying to understand before I would make any decisions. But a lot of the things that we started to think about were things that we take for granted in the tech world, which is like, how do you think about empowerment, increase the velocity of decision making, more experimentation mindset, where you start with small things. So I'll start with a small example that ends up playing out right in time for the pandemic. So most companies today still don't think about a work from home or a remote workforce as something that everyone should start embracing. So one of the first things we did was, not only did we create a work from home program for the digital team, was we then said, why don't we have a work from anywhere program? And that doesn't mean working permanently anywhere in the world, but so one of the benefits of working for an airline is you get to pretty much have free global travel.
You use the product, yeah.
Use the product, but not just our product, but all of our partners. So we had this thesis as a leadership team that said, why don't we extend that opportunity? So if someone is working, so someone goes to Maui with their family, that's a long trip from Toronto or from Calgary or Vancouver. And if they decided they want to stay an extra week in Maui or a week and a half, why couldn't we let them stay there? They cover, obviously they're already there. We've already paid for their flight there to a certain extent. Why shouldn't we let people work from there? And it wouldn't count as vacation. So we instituted a work from Maui program for my team to test out working from home and then working even further from home. And that had two outcomes that we didn't anticipate. One is it built a greater trust factor, because who wants to give up that perk?
Of course.
And then two, we started to push our internal technology to say, can people really work from anywhere in the world?
And three, I think it really gets into the mind of where you're, like when you're traveling and if you're working for an airline, the ideas that you're going to have during that portion of your trip are probably going to be so much better in fixing the experience that you're having, right? Because you're going to be able to pinpoint all sorts of problems and see them.
Yeah, and not only, and the other benefit was, let's say there's someone comes after talent on my team, and someone is willing to pay, I'm making this up, $10,000 or $15,000 more. You then have to quantify to yourself, and I've gotten feedback about this, on how much is that freedom, that autonomy, that empowerment, that trust, and that benefit of working from anywhere while you're traveling, how much is that worth to you? And there's no number, like there's no magic number, and someone can figure that out for themselves and their family, but it became a way to think, it became a barrier for people trying to recruit from our team.
You know, I think that like travel for me, especially in my career, really played a role. I mean, I've turned down jobs at the time that might have been 30% more in revenue for me, where I've said, I just don't want to commute an hour and a half every day. There and back. I mean, hour and a half, 3 hours out of my day is not worth it. The headache is not worth it. I don't want to take that opportunity. So absolutely. I mean, having that, you know, it's almost a priceless type thing of what your sanity is worth. And then when you get another offer, you get to quantify what that price actually is.
Yeah, so that's exactly right, Cyril. So we did that, and then we did other things. Like we started to create these guiding principles. So we created like some of these guiding principles that everyone on the team had to adhere to, and we would measure people against it. So some of the things were like worshiping velocity. How quickly can you move? Data trumps hierarchy. All the things that we talk about in tech companies that get us to think that way. We started to institute those as values that we really, really wanted the team to start to have, right? So everyone talks about like failing fast, learning fast, but do you really have mechanisms to enable people to do that? Most of the time, if you fail at something, you get punished for it, or you don't get considered for a raise or a promotion. So as part of our team, because we couldn't influence the whole organization yet, it was just our team, was how do we reward the experimentation mindset? We would actually give people roles that force that to take place, and we wouldn't measure, let's say, the revenue implication or the guest experience implication. It would be, can we measure how many times you tried something before it worked?
Amazing. It's awesome. It comes up almost every podcast where every innovator comes on and it's like, you have to make a culture of being able to fail fast and fail often and reward that. And it's so often than not that large enterprises really struggle to adopt that very same mentality. Because as you said, people get in shit, they get in trouble for failing, and then they're scared of failing, or they try to sweep it under the rug, and then it manifests into something even bigger later on. So,
Yeah,
um,
and let me be clear. In some parts of our business, experimentation and failure are not acceptable, right? Like so, in our
mhm.
core sort of function of like flying the plane, the
Yeah, of
airport,
course,
no tolerance for what I've just described,
of
right? So
course.
so completely, we have to completely respect what happens there. But that's the thing. You can't take the way you work and apply it equally across the entire company. Different parts have to operate differently, and that's what we were trying to do. Was let's keep that mantra of safety first, which is absolutely critical. The no failure, no experimentation. That's important for flying the plane. On our side of the business, if we took no risks and we took no experimentation and we operated like other parts of the business, we would get nothing done.
Cool. So let's talk about some of the outcomes that did ended up happening. So it's been what now, 2 years since you've been doing
Two
this?
years.
So 2 years, what are some of the outcomes that have come out? Like, what are some of the tactical things that have come out of you doing all this experimentation? How has WestJet changed for the better because of the program that you've run?
Yeah, so let me apply it directly to what's happening today in this sort of pandemic.
Cool.
So we were one of the first airlines to build. I think we may have been the first Canadian airline where we built an AI chatbot. Doesn't sound that sophisticated today, but 2 years ago, that is still a bit of a bet.
Yeah, absolutely.
About 18 months ago, um, the amount of
So what's some of the functionality the chatbot does? And let's just walk through the use case.
so everything from inquiries to FAQs, and sometimes people use her for entertainment. Uh,
Oh, cool.
so essentially, think of her as a call center agent that automates and scales,
Could
right?
you
On the
reschedule a flight if you missed a flight on it?
you can make requests to do that, and if she can't handle it, she eventually passes it off to call agent.
Okay.
So
So a call
she's got
agent that is well informed before I even speak to that call agent.
yes. So the information that she's not able to handle gets passed off. So there's a ton of functionality that I can go into
That's
detail, but
awesome.
here's what's more important.
Other
At some
airlines that I go, by the way, other airlines that I fly, I sit on the hold for 2 hours, talk to someone, get to the gate, and what I needed done is still not done. There's another
right,
big Canadian airline that should know what I'm talking
well,
about.
I mean, in fairness, we still had long wait times during this crisis as well, but
Yeah.
they would have been worse without her name is Juliet. Without Juliet, there
Okay.
were there were there were times, Sheetal, her traffic volumes were 40x higher than average, not
Wow.
40%,
40
40x.
times.
40
Wow.
times the normal traffic pattern. So I can't go into the numbers because it's not public, but there were times that she has deflected tens and thousands of calls away from the call center,
Okay.
tens of thousands in
Amazing.
like 2 months. Other areas that we've improved on. So, for
And
example,
you guys did this all homegrown? Like you have an AI team, you did all this. Did you buy versus build? Like what were some of the things that went into it?
yeah. So we have
Discuss
an
what you
AI
can.
team. Yeah, yeah. So the way we think about it, one of the other things we changed when I joined was everything we were going to build and everything we were going to provide was always going to be in partnership with best in breed, right?
Gotcha.
So whether it's the AI chatbot, or whether it's reimagining our digital and our mobile and our web experience,
Mhm.
we would always find partnerships to help drive that. And obviously we're in conversation with your organization as well on
Yep.
where what that will look like as well. But so the answer to that one is we partnered with a firm in Silicon Valley to help us build it, but that was in partnership with our technical teams, in partnership with their teams, and we do that across the board where we don't build
Love it.
anything completely like homegrown WestJet. And the way to think about that is in this world, you're never going to be better than anyone else. The best way to build things is through partnerships who are best in class at what they do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So, okay, so sorry, continue on that,
Yeah. So,
on that
so the
journey.
other things that we got really good at is just the velocity of how we deploy improvements. So typical release schedule was we're doing about 2 to 3 product releases a month during a normal cycle.
Hmm.
We were doing over 30 during the pandemic, right?
Wow.
So we got to a point where that's 15x the velocity of a typical week, and we weren't losing any quality in our deployment of code.
And this is very different. I want all of our listeners and users to know this. This is very different. I work a lot in the airline space. Other airlines have decided to sit on the sidelines and wait this out instead of accelerating growth and innovation right now. So this is amazing to hear what you guys are doing. It's out of the ordinary. I don't know if you've talked to other of your other peers at other organizations, but they've been really we got to sit and wait. And I get it. There's a lot of CFO constraints put on them, but they've been very sit and wait.
Yeah, thanks for that, Cheeto. And one last thing was, and on the functionality that we couldn't build fast enough. For example,
Mhm.
there are certain instances where we couldn't automate the change or cancel, whether it was through Juliet or our online tools. We just couldn't get to the velocity because there's unique use cases that prevented that. As you know, you
Sure.
solve for like the 90%. There's always going to be a 5 or 10% that you can't automate. So our teams ended up building online forms that people then wouldn't have to call in, but they could submit it. And within like a week, we got like 60,000 forms submitted that we've started
Mhm.
processing without people having to be on wait. So on wait time. So what's important here is what we started to do 2 years ago doesn't necessarily have to have bear fruit immediately,
Yep.
but suddenly the pandemic happens and it validates the model that we put together in the last 18 months.
Awesome. Awesome. I wanted to take a break here. I've been doing this the last couple of episodes. I'm going to fire a couple of questions off at you. They're going to be so out of the just whatever comes into my head, which is a pretty effed up place. But I'm going to
Okay.
fire some questions, but it's all going to be about getting to know you better. And then we'll go back into some of the stuff you're doing and some of the innovation that's coming out of this pandemic for WestJet. Um, where's your favorite restaurant in Toronto?
Oh, I mean, Akira Back is one of my favorites.
Okay. I love it.
Akira Back
Akira
is,
back.
yeah,
Another shout out for Akira back.
another show. Yeah.
So you're afraid of flying. We were talking about this before. You work for an airline company, but you're afraid of flying. But if you were to be able to fly anywhere right now, where would you go?
So that's a good question. Probably Florence. Italy is my favorite. Is one of my favorite places in the world. But my background is Maui right now because I think that place is magic as well. So it'd be a combination of Italy and Maui.
You got the passes. You could do both as soon as this is over.
Well, I know, but we got to wait for this to end. But yes, yeah.
Work from anywhere. Work from anywhere.
The funny thing is, I'm the only one. I don't think I've taken advantage of that. Most of my team has yet, but I haven't.
Awesome. What are you binge watching right now?
I just finished The Last Dance. I'm not sure if that qualifies as binge watching, but
Dude, it is binge
what
watching.
it makes me feel old. But I miss. I mean, the Pistons were my team prior to Jordan coming in, so
Yeah.
just remember watching that with my dad growing up. So I binge watched it twice.
I got a problem. I end up watching it on Monday night, and obviously it's a work night, and I get up pretty early, and I can't sleep. I'm like an idiot. I don't know why I do it right before I go to bed, and then I'm lying in bed going, Jordan, Jordan is so right. He was so hard on everybody, but he did. He walked the walk. He talked the talk. It was like he never told anybody to do anything that he wouldn't do himself. Like it was super. It's better than reading a nonfiction leadership book. Like just listening and watching the way he conducted himself to perfect his art. If you're not watching
Yeah,
The Last Dance, you got to watch. You don't even have to like basketball. Just watch The Last
well,
Dance.
100%. The soundtrack is amazing,
Do,
and
do you have the Spotify playlist?
no, I saw it the other day, but
It's so
I'm
good,
gonna listen to it.
dude.
Yeah, but the other thing is, people forget how violent it was back then, right? Like
Yeah.
compared to the NBA today, it's not even the same NBA, but yet he didn't complain about how battered and bruised he got. He just played the game,
He
right?
just
They
kept,
all
and
did.
he was not a crybaby at all. Um, the Pistons actually just destroyed him. Like he was getting body slammed. Like,
Yeah, all of
no,
them,
awesome.
all of them.
All of them, all of them, all of them. All right. Let's cut back. So, this pandemic is going to change the way travel experiences are going to be handled, and so the chatbot is an amazing example that you just gave us of what WestJet is doing to 40x spike is huge, and I can only imagine your call center trying to deal with it. Let's walk through a couple other user experiences that you guys are thinking of how we're going to change the way we travel moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a magic bullet on this one, Cheadle. This one is going to be one that every airline or tour operator is going to have to rethink because it's going to be completely a different story of what the experience will look like, right? So
Mhm.
we're starting to rethink what the guest journey is going to start to look like gate to gate in partnership with the airports. We don't have the answers today, but one of the things that is going to be 100% true is if we thought digital played a role or had to play a role in the guest experience,
Mhm.
now there is going to be no doubt it is going to be like it'll be table stakes to get that right. Everything from enabling more capabilities in the app, right? how do we reduce human contact if people want less of that? And they're going to want
Sure.
less of that, right? Whether it's enforced or not, people are going to want less of that. So how do we improve check-in experiences and boarding experience that are maybe biometrically driven as opposed to human
So we're talking facial recognition, no more going to the
fingerprint?
kiosk, the printer. Yeah, I just wrote a blog that's about to come out soon. Just talking about like there's stuff you could do all your check-in process in your app. Maybe you just go up to a printer and you scan the printer code into your phone and your baggage tags come out. Like you don't have to touch these screens anymore and do all these things anymore that we used to do, right?
I mean, something simple like I live in a condo. I don't even want to touch the door handle to go down the stairs,
Right,
right?
right.
And there's not even that much traffic to go down the stairs. What's the hypothesis and how many people are going to want to touch a kiosk? I don't know what the answer to that is. We'll have to see what
Hmm.
the data will show. But I think across all of the physical touch points, the question will be, can that be changed so it doesn't have to be a physical interaction? Even something like um, magazines or other printed material. Are you
Hmm.
going to want to touch that? I don't know.
I never wanted to touch that before.
Okay. So if you didn't want to touch it before, it's not going to get easier, right? So if you thought it was hard before, it's not going to get easier. So those are the
Yeah.
questions we're starting to
I
ask
never even
ourselves.
wanted like when I look at somebody who puts their phone behind those like magazines on the plane, I'm like, have you not watched those like documentaries on what's happening behind those things? Don't put your stuff there.
Well, I mean, the level of non-digital things that are also taking place are going to be dramatic. But just to go back to your question around the digital experience, I think that's where the investment's going to have to happen. Not just at WestJet, it'll be every airline in the world has to rethink which parts where we really accelerate our investment in digital and technology, because people aren't going to go back to what it looked like before, right? So I'd rather check
It's
it.
more than it's just more than digital, right? I mean, if you even look at technology, like how is air circulation happening in an airplane? How could you reconstruct engineering wise how we all sit on a plane? All these sorts of things. I'm sure you guys are completely reimagining it right
Totally, and we're even partnering with Canadian university. I can't talk about the details, just to go through the research to prove what we're going to do is actually working, as opposed to just making assumptions just amongst ourselves. But yes, absolutely. Even like a thermal scan for temperature. That's not a
now.
purely digital technology, but that's going to be start to be incorporated more and more across the board, right? So, or even how you drop off your bags, like all of that processes are going to be rethought, and the hard part will be how do you standardize that beyond just one airline, right? So it's
Mhm.
interesting if you do it, but if there's a different policy somewhere else, I think that'll be I'm actually not sure the technology is going to be the hard part. It'll be how do we standardize this from one airline to another, one
Sure.
country to another. What, like, that's the bigger challenge on what the guest journey map will look like. But I can't imagine no airline not rethinking what this will look like, especially as digital becomes the enabler.
Sure. You brought up another great point there, as a lot of airlines are going through this and thinking about this. And I guess fortunately for us here in Canada, we're able to see China come back online, and we're able to see some parts of Asia come back online with their airlines. What are some of the things that they're doing right now that you think you could use your R&D department, that's we'll call it rip off and duplicate, to bring over here?
Um, I'm not sure some of those things translate as easily, because I think we have, I mean, at a high level, some of the things that obviously the social distancing thing is still uh, playing out. They're going to invest more in testing and tracing, and
Mhm.
they've already started to do the thermal scans as well. I think our investments are going to be around tools and automation that we can start to look at. The one thing that we know from what's happening in Asia is the type of consumer that is starting to travel and fly. They tend to be younger, a little more affluent, tend to be single. And then, so then you start to think, well, if those are the audiences that we're going to start to see travel first, what tools would they want to see? So it's less about copying
Mhm.
the technology they're building, but looking at the audiences that are going to be the most comfortable to start traveling, and then ask ourselves the question, what should we build for them? Because as you know, right, you don't use technology to say, I'm going to build the technology and hope people use it.
Yeah.
You look at what problem are you trying to solve, and then say what technology can enable that.
Gotcha. We got a question that came online, and it's when do you think we'll be able to implement these changes, and will it happen fast?
So I'll answer from two perspectives in terms of like the safety and hygiene stuff. Some of it's already
Mhm.
happening. So for example, we have increased sanitization. We fog the interior of the plane every night. The middle seats currently are not able to be sold. Everyone has to wear a mask, including the passengers and all the flight crew. Social distancing of 6 feet as you board the
Mhm.
plane. So all of those things are already happening from a safety perspective. On the digital perspective, as we start to look at the recovery of the industry, we're now looking at capabilities that we are starting to present to get funding to say, here are I'm making this up, 5 or 6 capabilities that we think will be critical by, again, by October.
Mhm.
What are the people we need and the services we need to build to make that happen? So for the last few weeks, it's been about sort of keeping the airline, liquid enough to keep it as a, obviously
Yeah.
existing as an entity,
Yeah.
as every business is. And then the next phase is going to start looking at what do we need to build in preparation for that. So the timing is a great question. This week and next week, we start to get into planning phase around what those new capabilities will look like from a digital perspective.
And do you work closely with the airport authorities? Like, are the airlines involved a lot with the various airports? Because every airport I notice, it doesn't even matter within the same country has its own rules and like its own way of doing things. So, are you guys currently working with all the airports within your network that you're flying into to see what they're
And
doing?
we were doing that before the pandemic. So what was
Okay.
interesting is so I'll answer the pandemic question specifically, but before the pandemic even hit, our teams on the digital side were starting to work closely with the digital teams within the airports to also start to think about what areas of improvement can we make. And in fact, the sad part is we had a bunch of proof of concepts ready to go in 3 months to test out these new capabilities with the airports, and they were equally disappointed we couldn't deploy them.
Right.
So if we were doing it before, we're certainly going to be doing it now because the partnership requirement now is even greater than it was before. I mean, it was already high then, but certainly most of the things we're contemplating will always involve the airport and how we work together on that.
Very cool. Very cool. Um, all right. So as you're starting to look at these experiences, and as you say, like the willingness, especially for WestJet right now, has been to adapt change really quickly, and do more and more releases. What kind of pressures has that put on your team to like step up? You know, you got finite amount of resources. How are they handling this huge demand or this massive change of something that may have had a product roadmap, you know, 1, 2 years out, and now it's all being condensed really quickly?
Yeah, I don't think this is different than any other organization. It's the talent and learning gap in order to build these capabilities, right? So now, on a positive note, what I tell my team is when all of this clears, it's going to be one of the most important roles in the
Hmm.
company as part of the recovery. And not just here, it'll be every industry. Anything this pandemic has shown us is people with digital and technology skills coupled with, people and leadership skills are going to be infinitely employable because that's where every company is going to go. So the way we're trying to close the gap is everything from ongoing training, even during the periods where things were slowing down, to we're trying to bring forward projects that we know are going to have high impact, so people have this
Hmm.
great motivation to build it. And then three, finding partners. It's a term we've used inside, which is having ninjas train our ninjas, right? So I may have gotten that for you actually, where
Hmm.
like we're not going to build it on our own, but how do we find partners to augment the skills around that so
Yeah.
our team gets better as a result of that? So it's not an easy answer. It's the biggest challenge, which is obviously mapping the problem against the people that we have and finite resources. So that's why we're going through a prioritization exercise to say what would the next 3 to 5 things that we were planning to build a year from now, what would that look like in 3 to 6 months as opposed to a year or two? And then we just focus on those as opposed to trying to do 30 things. There's at
Hmm.
least 70 solutions we can come up with, Sheetal, across
Yeah, of
the
course.
guest journey. And maybe we're only going to pick three, right?
Yeah,
Because there's 70 touch
what
points.
are the most impactful ones right now? Let's get those out the door. So, speaking of that, since you have so much to do, are you currently hiring?
We aren't right now,
Okay.
but once we get through the phase where we're committing to the projects, then we're going to have to start bringing some of our people back that as part of the leave of absences a few weeks ago.
Hmm.
But as we start to get approval on some of the key projects that we are going to put forward before even the recovery happens, then that's when we're gonna the people element's gonna come in.
Awesome. We got another question. Are other countries advancing too in implementing digital into their airlines?
So I can't speak factually whether they are or not, but
Mhm.
every report you read, every consultant guidance, or I think Forbes just came up with an article on what the future of travel look like. It has
It
to
was
like
really, it was, that's a great, you know what, we'll actually repost that article on our social feeds, but I was reading that too. It was a fascinating article.
wait, we don't want to talk about a 4 hour.
Yeah, yeah, the
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
4 hour wait and like all the testing that's going to have to be done and how you have to seclude everyone into like areas.
So let's assume that's true. Let's assume that's the way
Mhm.
it's going to go. Imagine what capabilities you can build into the app in the future that allows that to make that even less. I try to create as less friction as possible because it's
Yeah,
already going
of
to have a
course.
ton of friction, right? So those are things people and digital and technology officers across with their partnership with their airport partners on how do you use digital to improve that capability. Like maybe getting a feed that says the security line today is 35 minutes versus 95 minutes. Wouldn't you like to
Sure.
know that? Right? Or there's too many people in the lounge, so you're probably not going to be wanting to go there. You may want to go to a different restaurant, right? So you can go through example after example and example. If that Forbes article is correct that it will be 4 hours,
Mhm.
then digital becomes even more important because you're not going to want to talk to a guest agent every 5 minutes trying to get updates on what the experience looks like.
Absolutely.
So to answer the question more specifically, I can't imagine airlines not thinking about this at scale globally because it's
Mhm.
the only lever that you can apply that scales in its solution. And what I mean by that for like non-technology people is when you hire one person to do a job, that doesn't scale because you're continually adding a person to challenge it, to tackle the solution. But if you can apply digital or technology to it, it can almost infinitely scale,
Right.
right? Just like Juliet can handle, you know, 40x her normal volume, a human can't scale to 40x.
And did you have Juliet released while when the 737 Max issue happened?
Yeah, she was already 730 Max was 2019. We released Juliet in late 2018.
Okay. And what were some of the learnings you saw from that? Because I'm sure that was an increase in spike of usage right away, right?
Yeah, but yes, but the difference is it's fairly localized. Something like I think it's 80% of all Juliet's interactions now involve COVID-19, which is
Okay.
also a crazy stat. During the 737 Max, it didn't really affect the traffic volume to her that dramatically. People are still interested in the information, but
Great.
if you think about most people asking, it's pretty much similar question and answer. The frequent business traveler or the leisure traveler who may have misheard information. So that's easier to manage because it's localized and the volume did not cause the spike that this did. I mean, transparently, for the first few days, we she couldn't even handle the traffic load that was hitting her during
Mhm.
COVID, so we had to find a way to increase capacity.
Awesome. Awesome. Um, Alfredo, another question for you, just on the industry in general. How do you see the industry bouncing back? I mean, it's a scary time to be at an airline. I saw Avianca just filed for bankruptcy the other day. I'm sure there's going to be many more that are going to come out of this just because they worked on such tight margins before all this happened, and it's just the nature of the way the business is. But what do you see the outlook is like? What do you feel is going to happen out there? With a lot of these airlines, not necessarily just WestJet.
Yeah, so I think maybe I'll state this with a few bunch of potential scenarios, and then you and I can debate which one we think is the likely one.
Sure.
So
I
at a
like it.
high
You
level,
turn this around on me.
well, it could be,
Smart move.
you can tell me if I'm wrong or right on it. So there's a bunch of different theses on how this will recover, right? And if anyone tells you they know how it's going to be, like I don't think that's correct. I think everyone's looking at the same data and trying to make assumptions on how that will look. One scenario is people are so tired of being at home and being isolated, they
Mhm.
can't wait to get on a plane to go somewhere far away, right?
Hey,
That
you
like
got
like
me.
like you, right?
Well, I mean, this is the longest I've been grounded in 12, 13 years. It was nice in the beginning, and now I'm like, I gotta get out of here. It's snowing here in May. What am I doing in Toronto?
Right. And so there's that, and then you have all this. So it's pent up demand that someone like you, and there's many people like you, that
Mhm.
can't wait to get out. Then there's a flip side argument that says there's been so many people affected economically. Is the first thing you're going to do to spend money on travel?
Sure, sure.
So those are two ends of the spectrum, and then there's everything else in between. On the business side, one scenario is, wow, Zoom, Blackboard, Microsoft Teams, and all these digital tools have shown us that maybe sometimes what you and I are doing is sufficient and there doesn't need to be as much travel.
Mhm.
Or the other version of that
Absolutely,
could be, the other version is, I miss you, Sheetal. I'm tired of Zoom. I'm going to come out and fly to you because nothing beats face to face. So if you
absolutely.
parse those two audiences together, it's hard to determine um, where it's gonna fall into place. So the typical forecast is anywhere between 2 to 5 years is when we will expect recovery of the industry to where it is today. But there's going to be a long path to get there. And the reason why that range is so wide is because no one knows yet which of those scenarios is going to play out, right? And we're starting to track data from
Mhm.
external sources as even our internal sources, like what are people searching for on our website? Are they starting to look for flights? Is that increased over the last period? So and today there's not enough data to see what the direction will be in terms of those four high level scenarios I've sort of presented.
Is there anything that came out in the data that you could share with us? That's pretty cool. Like everyone's looking to go to Saskatoon or something like that.
No, we haven't. So we've only started to look at it in the last 2 to 3 weeks. So that's when things have started to stabilize a bit in terms of what we call the low point of demand.
Mhm.
Nothing yet, but I think what we're going to start to see based on the preliminary data is there's going to be specific cities that are driving more searches from where they want to start departing from.
Fair, fair. So going back to like your built up demand scenario, I definitely think these tools that we've now started using, we're using Zoom right now, but we already talked about it in the beginning here. We want to go to Akira back and have dinner together as soon as we can. I think it's like from the business side of me, there's definitely a time and a place for everything. Where I used to jump up and just be like, hey, I gotta go jump on a plane and go do this now. Maybe I don't. Maybe I could do a lot of the pre-work before jumping on a plane now, leveraging these tools, and there's more of an appetite for everybody to leverage these tools, because even as a business traveler, just because I want to go doesn't mean that the person on the other side is going to be able to meet with me. And so these are all the types of factors that I think, as we start figuring out how to come out of this pandemic, it gets a lot trickier. So
Well,
let's
yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
Just to add to that, Sheil, just quickly. So if you think about the stigma on online learning, if you got your degree through an online tool, it was often viewed as what, like substandard, or it's not as prestigious.
You hire a lot of people. Did you ever see University of Phoenix and take it seriously?
Um, I actually not sure if I know anyone from there
Right.
personally,
I'm
but
just picking
and
on them because they advertise a lot. They have
right,
been
right.
for a long time.
But let's say like our elite schools in Canada, like Waterloo, U of T, and all these
Sure.
and McMaster and Western and Queens, if they start to go more and more online and it's a hybrid model, you no longer look down on that, right? So if you think
Absolutely
about
not.
if you think about from an office perspective, there was sometimes a stigma around working from home
Yeah.
or like a remote worker. I think that's all gone. I think
I
that's going
was
to change.
I got converted. I mean, you've been to our office. I like teams sitting close to each other. I'm like, collaboration happens in groups. I've changed. Like I look, I definitely think there's a time and place for us to be able to do that, but do we got to do that 5 days a week anymore? No. We've
Yeah,
found ways to start still being collaborative and still keep our learning and our efficiency while being remote.
there is. I used to say this at Facebook all the time, and it applies even at WestJet. There is nothing that beats face to face. Nothing, right?
Nothing. Nothing. Yeah.
However, on the days that I was traveling around the world, and if the only way to connect with my family, my loved one, was through Messenger, that's
Mhm.
good enough, right? Because I can't be face to face. So
Yeah.
it's no different now. Of course, I would love to get on a plane and have dinner with you at a Kiribati as often as I could. But when I can't and it's not possible, we've proved like the digital transformation internally for companies has shown that it isn't always necessary to be face to face as much as it used to be.
Cool. Alfredo, we're coming to the top of the hour. Let's take all technology. You and I could geek out and talk about that for a long time. What do you think needs to be done for us to come out of this pandemic? What do you think the government should be doing? What do you think us individuals should be doing? What do you think is going to happen to come out of this?
Oh man. So first of all, I'm not a medical doctor or a health
I know,
professional
I know.
or a politician. I do think the
But you are a
concept of,
problem solver, so let's have your take on it.
okay, so if it was up to me, I think the stigma of wearing a mask is going to go away, and more of that is going to be
Mhm.
acceptable. And in fact, if you're not wearing some version of a mask, yes, people will look oddly at you versus what it used to be. You know, before if you wore a mask, people were like, "What's wrong with Sheetal?" Now it's going to be, "Why are you not wearing a mask?"
Yeah,
Number two, I do think that the concept of social distancing is going to play out in public places. So, for example, if you're at a restaurant, and you know what Toronto restaurants are like, everyone's jammed in. Maybe there's going to be more
Jim.
spacing required, and then obviously the testing.
We're
Like,
gonna miss the we're gonna miss that jammed in part though. There's something about it that just that's what
totally,
created the vibe. We're gonna miss it.
yeah. And then I think that the other one is probably is the testing piece, right? So I do think that some sort of version of rapid testing that's available to the masses will make a difference in how the pandemic is managed. Because let's face it, this virus isn't going away just because it's the summer. It's going to happen
Absolutely.
again in the fall, and I'm not sure, you know, the way we. I guess what I'm saying is I'm not sure shutdowns every fall is the strategy.
Right.
It's got to be something more broader than that. And I think we've learned enough now on what we can do the next time. So I think it's a combination of those three, right? Find ways to enforce a social distancing from a layout perspective in whatever public space that looks like. What does the mask strategy look like? And then third, just rapid testing.
Do you see contract tracing anywhere in there?
You know,
It's a touchy subject here in North America, whereas in other parts of the
yeah,
world, it's like you're effing doing it, and too bad.
yeah. I'm not sure that will go easily as here as it did in, like, remember we were talking earlier. What could we employ from China? We're not like they were able to do contact tracing pretty accurately and quickly. I'm not sure that's something we would do here right away, or even in the foreseeable future.
Mhm.
From a technology or digital tracking perspective, I mean.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a tough one, right? It's your privacy, but at the same time, you kind of want to know if you did come in contact with someone, and you should isolate before you go see your parents.
Yeah,
It's a
but
tough.
in order to get the accuracy you're looking for, it can't just be a little bit of your. I think you'd have to give a lot of information away to make that an
Yeah.
accurate picture, because you can't do it halfway. It's you either going to do it accurately or you're not
Mhm,
going to do it at all. There's no sort
mhm.
of it's a mediocre contact tracing, right? And if you look at what they did in Asia, it's pretty. Sorry, in China, it's pretty accurate.
Yeah,
Like,
China. I mean, South Korea has done. Singapore has its own flavor of using Bluetooth to do it. There's a lot of cool solutions. I've just been reading up on them just because I'm super interested in saying what could we do to actually open up more safely. Like we've sat at home for 2 months. What are we going to do to open up and get everybody back out in a safe way? I still don't think there's a proper answer to that question. By the way, I think like
no, I don't think the riser.
we're just saying okay, we flattened the curve. Where hospitals aren't at capacity, let's open up until the hospitals hit capacity. Like where's the solution? I still don't see it. I mean, obviously wear masks, gloves, have your Lysol and stuff, but
Yeah, I mean, it'll be the problem for the ages to solve, right?
mhm. Awesome. Alfredo, any last words? What else would you like to share?
No,
I could do this for
no,
hours with you, by the way, but well,
well, I look
you
forward
got
to
a
doing it in
hard
person with
stop.
you. Yeah, well, I look forward to doing this in person with you at some point. And thanks for everyone for tuning in. And it's a challenge. It's a challenging time for everyone. And the only solace I can provide is we are probably the industry that's the most affected, and we think we're doing the best we can. So hopefully others are as well.
That is awesome, man. Keep doing the amazing work at WestJet. I know every single one of our viewers is anticipating some sort of travel with your companies whenever they can safely and the right way. And I'm glad to hear they got you on the case to make that happen. So thank you. Again, thanks for tuning in to First Name Basis. This podcast is available on Apple, Spotify, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, a bunch of social media channels. I'm Sheetal. Thanks so much, Alfredo. You gotta promise me you'll come back and do it again.
I'd love to. Thanks so much, Sheetal. Thanks, everyone.